Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm talking about giving quilts away as gifts. There's a few things that I think about when I'm doing this, which is most of the time. Most of my quilts get given away. I do keep some, but a lot of them get given away. And it kind of falls into three broad categories. So there's kind of before I give the quilt, and then kind of packaging and making it look pretty, and gifting it, like presenting the quilt. And then there's kind of a piece that's after you give the quilt, or the mindset before, just before and after. Anyway, there's a mindset piece to really giving a quilt away. And I do want to talk about that at the end, because I think that's the place where a lot of people, a lot of quilters can tend to feel a bit of angst. So we'll just talk about that at the end. But first, the practical stuff. So as some of you know who follow the channel, if you did my Big Blocks quilt along, that was the last kind of series of videos on the channel, which you can still go and see if you want. I said that quilt is for my friend who's leaving town. Now she's not leaving till the end of summer, so I've got some time, but I started thinking about what I need to do to get it ready to give it to her. So there's two things I'm gonna do before I do anything else. So the quilt's finished. That would be number one, obviously. But next, I'm absolutely gonna put a label on it. So I usually put a label either on the back or on the binding. I've got different videos about the different ways, and a blog post about different ways you can label your quilt. You'll find the links to those in the description. But however I do it, I'm gonna put my name, that I made it and designed it. I'm gonna put where I made it, the year I made it, and then if I'm doing a bigger one on the back, which I am gonna do this time, I'm gonna say who it's for and why. So I'm gonna say it's for my friend Mary who's moving away, and put that all on the back, so that there's kind of a history to the quilt, no matter what ends up happening with it later. And it's also personalizes it for her, so it makes it kind of extra special. So I definitely label the quilts. I usually label all my quilts, but I definitely label the quilts that I'm gifting. And there's one more reason to add a label, which I'll tell you about when I'm talking about that mindset piece about giving at the end. The second thing that I do always before I give a quilt is I wash it. Because I know not everybody does this, controversial, but I do. First of all, is I want the quilt to look the way it's gonna look pretty much, for the lifetime of the quilt. Obviously, the more you wash it, the more you use it, it gets softer, things change, colors fade, that kind of thing. However, most of the big changes with a quilt I find happen after the first wash. So if there's gonna be any little bit of shrinkage, that's gonna usually happen in the first wash. If there's gonna be any color bleeding, that's usually gonna happen in the first wash. So I wanna do that on my watch. So I use color catchers in the watch a little bit excessively, probably. I usually use about 3 or 4. That's probably not necessary. Depends on the quilt and the fabrics you're using and whether you think they're gonna bleed. But anyway, I also do usually give color catchers away for their first wash of the quilt. I'll talk about that later. But anyways, I want to do a wash with the color catchers, and I want to see it dried and it's like final size, basically, before I give it away, so that there's no surprises. Not just because the person might not like it as much when they liked it, they saw it the first time and then it changed in the wash, but they also might think that they've damaged it. So if it does shrink, or if something happens to it in the wash, they might think it's their fault and feel bad about it. So I want to do it on my watch. Watch. On my watch. I want to wash it on my watch. I can't say that. Anyway, I know not everybody does that, and actually not everybody washes their quilts at all. But that's another topic. And I'm sure there are good reasons for that, and I'm not judging anybody. You don't judge me for my choices, I won't judge you for yours, right? Okay. So for me, once I've got the label on and I've washed it, it's ready to go. I just need to package it up and make it look nice and pretty to give. So there's a couple things that I like to include with the quilt even before I package it up. So one is, depending on the colors, but if it's got any kind of bright color in it at all, even if I've already washed it with a color catcher, I will include one with the gift. And I have started including care cards, so quilt care instructions. I've actually made them myself on the computer because people kept asking me when I gave them the quilt. And I've turned it into a gift tag, which I've actually put a printable version of this that you can buy and download in my Etsy shop. So I start with the digital file I made, and I print it out using heavier cardstock that still goes through my home printer, and it comes out 4 cards to a page. So then I just use a paper only rotary cutter that I have, but of course you could use scissors to cut them apart. So I have a stack of these cards that I can just draw from whenever I want. And then I would use a hole punch to make a hole in the corner, or I actually use a leather punch like you use for a belt, because that's just what I have. But you could also just sort of paste it in the inside of a gift card if you wanted. You don't have to do the whole. So I was originally just using, I just titled it Quilt Care Instructions, but then I decided to do a couple variations. So now I have ones that say Made with Love, or A Gift for You, I think is the other one. So it actually doesn't have to be used for a quilt. If you make other homemade gifts that need to be washed, or people need to know the instructions for taking care of them, you could use it for that. So I've got it set up like a gift tag. So it's like who made it and who it's for. And then you can use like a highlighter or a pen to say, do you want to wash it with cold, hot, line dry, tumble dry, all that. And then there's a little section for special instructions. And I write the thing about the color catchers in there. I'm ridiculous about the color catchers. I'm not sponsored. It's just a thing that I worry about. We all have our things. Anyway, but as well as the practical stuff, I also like to put a note that says, like, I'm here to be used, or cuddle me, or not me, like the quilt, right? The gift. Use me, don't fold me up and put me in a cupboard and save me for best kind of thing. Like, so I try and make it clear in the little note that I'm giving people that they're supposed to use the quilt and enjoy it. And I usually also put a little note that says, if anything happens to it and it needs repaired, to send it back to me, and I'm happy to fix it for them. But I also like to make my quilts look nice when I give them. So you've probably seen quilts like done up with a ribbon and things like that. So if you're giving it in person, you possibly don't need to put it in, wrapping paper or a bag or anything like that. A ribbon and like the little gift tag, that would be enough. But I do like to make drawstring gift bags for mine. So I've got another video about that, which I'll show you the gift bags first. Excuse the mess roundabout, but this is usually what I would do, is make a massive drawstring gift bag. This one's got the rolled quilt inside, so it's a bit longer. You can see that in there. And then this one is more of a square, because it's got a quilt in it that you would fold like that, right? So you do it either way. And then you can either put the tag on this ribbon, or with another ribbon around the quilt inside. So you can put the tag on here, the care card if you want it or something. Anyway, the instructions for making these drawstring gift bags are exactly the same as my no measure gift bag video. So I'll put that in the description. It's basically just bigger, right? So, but you can kind of make them long for rolled quilts or square for folded quilts, depending what you're giving. And you can use the scraps from the quilt you just finished, or any old stash that you just want to get rid of. And people love those bags. They just love them. Sometimes they love them more than the thing that they get inside. Hopefully not more than the quilt. But anyway, so I would normally do that. If I am sending a quilt, so I'm like literally not going to see the person and I'm sending it in the post, I usually vacuum pack it. I've shown this on the channel before, I think. It doesn't reduce the weight of the quilt, but it does make it smaller in dimension, which can make shipping cheaper, but it doesn't look great because it's a squishy plastic bag. So I do like to put that in the drawstring bag so that it looks nicer as a gift when they open it up. And then I'll explain to them in a WhatsApp message or in the card that they can just pierce that vacuum bag or use it again or whatever. So that's how I deal with posting them away and that kind of thing. So that's mostly what I do, is the drawstring gift bags, but there's some other ideas. So you could, one that I like to do more when I'm wrapping unusual presents, but I think it could work for a quilt. I don't have a visual of it here, but like if you took some wrapping paper, so this works best for rolled quilts. So if you roll it up and then you put the wrapping paper around it, so you've got a tube of wrapping paper, but it's not closed at the ends, and then you squish it at the one end, tie a ribbon, squish it at the other end and tie a ribbon, and then you've got what looks like a little bonbon sweetie, and that can be quite a pretty way to give it. Obviously, there's a lot of wrapping paper depending on the size of your quilt, which is why I prefer the drawstring bags. But if you're in a pinch, that can look quite sweet. The other option, if you are in the same town as the person you're giving your quilt to, would be to ask whoever they live with to let you sneak in and place it on the bed or the sofa or wherever you want it to be, with a little card on top, flowers or something like that. So that's another idea if you want to just surprise someone and put it in situ in their home. So I think I've got a few other gift giving ideas like that on the blog. I've written a whole lot. I've got lots of opinions of this and I've written a lot of them down. So if you want to have a read of that, the link to that is in the description. Just go to the website. But I'm going to move on. So the most important thing, I think, when you are giving a quilt or considering giving a quilt to someone, is to really give it. So I see so many quilters. I'm in lots of quilting Facebook groups, and I see so many quilters getting so disappointed with the way that their quilts are received by family, friends, whoever they gave it to. So they'll complain they didn't get a thank you note, or they came over and the quilt was in the dog bed and covered in dog hair, or they saw it in a garage sale at their house, or folded up in the cupboard, not being used. And I just think we, as the quilters who are giving these gifts, we need to work on the mindset that we're in when we're giving the gift, rather than trying to change the recipient, okay? We can't change other people, but we can maybe think about it a bit differently and decide if we want to give that quilt or not. So here's a few things to keep in mind with that. So I don't know about you, but I have never given a quilt to a quilter, and I've never got one either. I know that's not true. I've done a little mini quilt swap on Facebook with another quilter, but as a gift present, I've never done that. So usually what I'm talking about is giving a quilt to somebody who doesn't quilt and probably also doesn't sew, which means we have to give them some leeway for their knowledge, okay? So they are not in the club. They're not a quilter. They're not gonna understand how much the fabric costs, how long it took you to make the quilt, any of that. We've got to assume they don't know any of that. Some people will, I get it, some people will say, oh, that must have taken you so long, and they sometimes would even think it takes longer than it actually does. That's, if you got one of those people, awesome. But most people don't get it. So what they're seeing is a blanket. We've all had that bugbear. It's a quilt, it's not a blanket. But they're seeing a blanket, okay? And it's also, this blanket is also a very large piece of home decor, okay? That's what it generally is. So to a non-quilter, it's a decorating object, right? Or a useful object in terms of like being an actual warm covering at night. So they might appreciate the craftsmanship or the time, but they're not going to understand how much it cost you or how long it took you to make. And their response is not going to be to that effort. The response is going to be to the item, usually. So the first thing about that I like to think about myself is, why did I make the quilt in the first place? Why did I get obsessed with quilting in the first place? Because I really enjoy the process of making the quilt. I get something out of that. It's fun, it's relaxing, I get to exercise my creative brain, I feel a sense of accomplishment when the quilt is finished. I get lots out of quilting. So that is what the cost of the fabric and my time is for. I am paying for the feeling that I got from making the quilt. So that value that we're putting on the quilt, unless you're actually selling your quilt somewhere, but that's a different thing. We're talking about giving them, right? The actual value of the fabric and the time, you should be getting that out of the process of making it. If you're not, and you hate making it, and it's just this big, awful thing, and you're just doing it because you've always done it, or you got taught as a child, why are we still doing it? So if you love it, then you should have got the value for your purchases and for the time you spent. Number one. Number two, if you're giving it to someone who doesn't generally say thank you for things. Like if they don't send you a thank you card when you send them, I don't know, a box of chocolates or an Easter egg or whatever you send, then they're probably not going to attach any extra significance to this just because you made it, just because it's a quilt, just because it costs you a lot of money and a lot of time. So if that's going to bother you, that they're not going to respond in a way, effusive or whatever, then maybe don't give it to them, right? So there is an argument for only giving quilts to people who really want them or really would appreciate them. That's fine. And if you just want, like I often just want an excuse to make a quilt, so I'm giving it to the person instead of buying them something else, that doesn't mean that they necessarily wanted a quilt. I just wanted to make it and I thought maybe they'd like it. So it's about me, it's not about them. Okay, this next one's harder. Guys, I'm almost scared to say it. But some people don't like quilts and they're not going to tell you. So I often I often talk to the person I'm going to give the quilt to ahead of time. I'm doing that less lately because it puts pressure on me because I feel like I promised it and then I take too long. So I'm doing it more as a surprise lately. So depending on your style, if you haven't talked to them about it first and you just went, they really like blue and they really like horses, and you made them a blue quilt with a horse in the middle, that doesn't mean they're going to love it, unfortunately. So people have different tastes, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And as I said, this is a gigantic, like depending on the size, but this is a gigantic home decor item. And if it's not to their taste, it kind of has to be okay if they want to put it in a drawer or give it away to somebody else who loves it more than they do. And I get that it's hard not to try to control what people do with the quilt. You heard me talk about how I give people instructions to use the quilt rather than save it for special occasions or whatever, because that's my bias. But at the end of the day, it is up to them what they do with it. And that can be tough, but I want you to, again, go back and remember how much fun you had making it. That's got to be the key. Otherwise, maybe don't give the gift. So I said earlier that there was another reason to put a label on your quilt. So this is not going to work every time, but if you personalize the quilt with a label, this is to David on the occasion of his wedding to Joan from Susan. I don't know, just making it up, with lots of love, and you put a little quote or an inscription or something like that, and the date and the place, it's less likely that quilt is going to get actually given away out of the home because it's personalized, whether they like it or not, whether they use it on their bed or not. That one's more likely than not going to be saved as a kind of family heirloom. So somebody else, a grandchild, somebody else down the road, even if the people you made it for don't love it and cherish it, somebody else might cherish it for the history and remember you and get interested in quilting because they looked at your quilt and all that kind of stuff. No, that's not always going to be the case, but I would say personally for me, and probably for a lot of people, it's harder to give something away that's got an inscription, which is essentially what a label is on a quilt, than it is to just give away a quilt that doesn't say anything on it. So that would be my other advice in terms of why to label on the back. If you're looking for ideas for like quotes and sayings to add to your labels, I've got a blog post about that as well. I will put that in the description. It's just got for like different events, different things you could say on the back if you've got a bit of writer's block. So I like to think of my quilts a bit like children. Now, my children are still at home, so I might feel differently when they're older. However, the basic concept I'm going with here is that we put a lot of effort into raising our kids and a lot of effort into making our quilts. But when they go off into the world, when they're adults or fully grown quilts, right, we can't control what happens to them. So the quilts are going to go off and live their quilty lives, whatever that means. So they might get snuggled and loved and cherished and displayed and used in your recipient's home. and just get worn out, which is what we want, you know, so that we know they were loved. Or they could have a different life. So their life could be that they had snuggles with the dog who cherished it and dragged it around the house. Or their life could be that somebody else came to the house and fell in love with it and it got adopted and moved away to somebody else's house, right? You know, it could be that it ends up in a thrift store and somebody buys it and makes a coat with it and puts it on Instagram. Have you seen all those reels where they cut them up and they make the coats? Yeah. And anyway, you don't know what the life of your quilt is going to be. So that's, again, why I would say label it, because if anybody's interested in the history of it, then they've got something to go on. But also, you just have to let it go, let it be. You played your role, you made it, and then it has to go off and live its life. If you don't want to let it go, you got to keep it. But how many quilts can you keep in your house? So if anybody's ever given quilts away to charity, it's kind of like that. So you usually don't, some charities you get some feedback, but usually you don't. Usually, and often there you're not allowed to label it, even the ones that I give to anyway. So you just give it away and it's gone, and you just have to trust that somebody is loving it somewhere. So if you can try and have that mindset, even for the ones that you give to members of your family, I think it'll probably make you a lot calmer, a lot happier, and it'll probably help your relationships because, again, now I don't know anyone personally who's had this, but I've seen so many really heart-jerking, that's not a word, you know what I mean? Like, just like, ugh, kind of posts on Facebook with these people who are just so hurt and so sad about the reaction that the person had to their quilt, which is kind of why I'm ranting and talking so much about it. And it's not worth it, okay? It's only fabric. It's a quilt. You enjoyed making it. Don't ruin your relationships over it. Yeah, the person should be more grateful, and maybe they should have a think about how much work went into it, but they're not quilters. They don't get it. They're never going to get it. And that's okay. You know, there's probably something else they're into that you don't get. And that's just what relationships are, and people are different and they value different things. And if you love them enough to give them a quilt, you've got to love them enough to let them just be blasé about getting the quilt. Like, you know, these things happen. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Take it for what you will. And I get that different people have different opinions on all of this, and that's absolutely fine. But as I was giving that, I'm pointing at it, it's on, you can't see it. I've got my friend's quilt on the wall for now because she's not going yet. So I can enjoy it and look at it for now. That's part of the value that I got from making it. And I'm thinking about labeling and packaging it up, and then I will be more than happy to send it away. And if I go and visit her in her new home, I'm not going to be searching for it. I'm just not. If I see it, great. But if I don't, that's fine. It's hers. She gets to do whatever she wants with it. So that's my thoughts on giving a quilt. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you wanted to pop a comment in the comment section, what's wrong with me today? the place where you put the comments, about either how you prep your quilts, do you wash them? If you don't, you know, why? Give me the reasons. I'm totally cool with hearing a different opinion. You know, how do you package them? Do you have any fun presentation ideas that people can steal and use when they give their gifts? And, you know, what do you think about, you know, preparing yourself mentally to really give that quilt away? Do you have any tips or any thoughts about that? So I hope any of that was useful. And if you are not already subscribed to the channel and you like scrap quilts and videos like this, then please do subscribe. And I hope to see you again next time. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.